Today I'm going to show you how I built my model railroad. Coming right up. I'm Roy Smith. It's always a pleasure to share the hobby of model railroading with you. In this video, I'm going to show you the highlights of how I constructed my N-scale Union Pacific Evanston Subdivision layout. Before talking about construction though, let me just briefly show you what the layout looks like today. This is what you see when you arrive at the door of my train room here in Panama. In fact, my train room is a spare bedroom that measures only 10 feet by 12 feet. So my layout's not very big, but it keeps me busy and it keeps me happy. It's a modern era N-scale layout set in southwestern Wyoming and northeastern Utah. And this is my track plan as it exists today. The plan is loosely based on the Union Pacific Evanston Subdivision, which stretches some 175 miles from Green River, Wyoming, west to Ogden, Utah. Feel free to hit the pause button if you'd like to examine the track plan more closely. I would like to show you the major tasks of layout construction in chronological order, but in many cases I can't do that because I often began one project, then got diverted to another project, and didn't come back to the first project until months or even years later. After several months of planning, I started to build the benchwork for my layout in April 2014 in my garage. I built it in sections held together by carriage bolts so that I could dismantle the sections in order to carry them up to my train room later on. As you can see, I built the benchwork for my staging yard at 48 inches above floor level, the main level at 56 inches above floor level, which is chest height for me, and the top of the backdrop at 72 inches above floor level, which is just above eye level for me. I varnished the benchwork so that it would look like nice furniture in the house. Then in August 2014, I carried the benchwork in sections up to my train room where I reassembled it. Right away, I began to lay cattle unit track for the lower level staging yard and the upper level classification yard at Green River. At the same time, I installed a series of photos on the backdrop depicting the scenery in the Green River area. A very important feature in the benchwork that I assembled early on was my eastern helix. It connected the upper and lower levels of the layout. I named it my eastern helix because it takes trains down to Cheyenne and all points east in staging. White Mountain was the first actual three-dimensional scenery that I built. It sits atop the eastern helix in order to hide the helix. It's called White Mountain not because I built it out of white styrofoam, but rather because of the thick layers of white sandstone that the prototype contains. And here you see the benchwork for my western helix, which I built months after building the eastern helix. I called it my western helix because it takes westbound trains down to Ogden, Utah, and all points west in staging. I built the western helix above my computer desk. To the right of the scenic divider on top of the benchwork lies the town of Evanston, Wyoming. And to the left is bare plywood, where I will later build Echo Canyon, Utah, as you will see. Laying the golden spike on the western helix in March 2015 enabled me to run trains in a continuous loop around my layout. Tracks in the western helix descend at a 2% grade, just as they do in the eastern helix. But unlike the eastern helix, which is circular, the western helix is oval-shaped. And more importantly, it was open from the very beginning, allowing easy access to it for track cleaning and for fixing any derailments that might occur in it. Now, over at Green River, I used pieces of DPM kits to build the town scene. This isn't very prototypical, but it was the best I could do at the time. Someday I may redo the town scene to more closely resemble the prototype. By far, the most dramatic structure at Green River is the former Union Pacific Depot. My good friend David Rary built it for me. For a number of years, Amtrak leased space in this building before discontinuing its service across southern Wyoming in 1997. The Union Pacific then turned the depot over to the city of Green River in 2013. But at this point, I was frustrated because the peninsula on my layout was so short that it didn't allow for any truly functional trackage at Evanston. So I extended the peninsula by 18 inches and modified the track plan on this part of my layout. Here you can see the footprint of the original track. At about the same time, I began to construct the Pocatello subdivision. This subdivision connects to the Evanston subdivision here at Granger, Wyoming. Adding this extension to my layout required me to make a hole through the scenic divider, but I'll talk more about this in a moment. All right, let's talk about my primary staging yard. As I indicated earlier, this was one of the first areas of the benchwork, trackwork, and wiring that I completed for my layout. My eastern and western helices connect the upper scenic level of the layout to the staging yard underneath. I included 8 inches of clearance between the upper level, where Green River is located, and the lower level staging yard. 8 inches may be adequate for N scale, but even so, there never seems to be enough clearance between levels on our layouts. Of the 8 tracks in the yard, only 2 were double-ended at first. The remaining 6 tracks were stub-ended. Eventually, I became very frustrated by this because it meant that locomotives entering any one of the 6 stub-ended tracks became trapped, and other locomotives had to couple up to the other end of the train to take it back in the direction from which it had come. So I redesigned the track plan to make all 8 tracks double-ended, as you can see here. Now my trains could run continuously on any of the 8 tracks, whether eastbound or westbound. But I failed to include a reversing loop in the plan for the staging yard. I now know that I will have to fix this major defect later on. Okay, let's return to the construction of the Pocatello subdivision. This really amounted to a significant extension of my layout as it existed at the time. I think you can see this on the track plan. The subdivision begins here at Granger Junction, where it connects to the Evanston subdivision. From Granger, the Pocatello sub runs to Pocatello, Idaho. I had to cut a hole in the scenic divider through which the tracks pass, and I began to put together a highway overpass to help hide the hole. From the get-go, I designed the yard at Pocatello to be a secondary staging yard for my layout. As such, it would add significant amounts of traffic to my layout, both east and westbound. The Pocatello extension of my layout required me to build a lift-out bridge at the closet door. The yard itself is 8 inches wide with 4 tracks and extends 9 feet. And now, turning to the Echo Canyon project. This is what Echo Canyon looks like today. But when I began to work on it at the beginning of July 2018, it looked like this: just plywood and track in an area of my layout that is only 6.5 feet long. In a series of 15 videos, I showed you how I put together this scene on my layout, starting with episode 1, in which I created the cliffs out of a layered block of white styrofoam. I used photos of the prototype to help me capture the feel of the canyon. In fact, it was photos of the 25-mile-long canyon that I saw on the internet in early 2014 that inspired me to come back to model railroading after being out of the hobby for almost 30 years. Photos of the canyon also led me to choose the Evanston sub to model. Now, Echo Canyon is the best spot for rail fanning on my layout. Eventually, I got around to fixing a big problem with the fascia and mountaintop at the eastern helix. This is what the fascia looked like before I began to open it up. I could access the track for cleaning or trains in the helix to fix derailments only through a small door on one side of the helix or by going underneath the benchwork. To fix this problem, I began by removing the masonite fascia. Now I could access the track much more easily, and I could see any trains running in the helix. Then I cut windows in the masonite and reinstalled it. At the same time, I made the top of White Mountain removable by cutting through the styrofoam. It was a tight fit, but now I could stand up inside the Helix if I needed to. Or I could access the Helix from above. This is what the Helix looked like with the mountaintop temporarily removed. If I learned anything from this experience, it was to always keep my track accessible. Eventually, I got around to building a lift-up bridge at the entrance to the train room so that I could run trains continuously on the upper level of the layout without them having to descend either Helix. First, I had a carpenter modify the room door so that it would swing out into the hallway instead of into the train room. Then, I built the bridge using extruded foam and lightweight lumber. First, let me remove the pink foam because the foam is not yet permanently attached to the benchwork. The bottom of the foam is laminated with a 1/4 inch thick sheet of plywood to protect the foam and give it additional strength. Now I can lift up the supporting benchwork like this toward the diesel storage shelf. My goal is to keep it as lightweight and as easy to lift up as possible. It lifts up out of the way so that I can easily come in and go out of the room. But look at this pink foam. It stretches as far as the eye can see. Did you know that pink foam is radioactive? No? Well, look at what it's done to this white shirt I'm wearing. It's even turning me pink. The blue box on my track plan shows the location of the lift-up bridge. It was a challenge to build because it was located in a corner of the room rather than along a straight wall. I used Cato expansion tracks to connect the track across the joints in the benchwork. When I wanted to lift up the bridge, I merely had to slide the expansion tracks to their closed position. The bridge always stays in the up position for easy access to the train room, except when I'm in the train room running trains, as you see here. Lastly, I want to show you how I recreated the railroad complex at Evanston. Here you see a satellite view of the railroad complex on my layout. The complex features 3 primary structures. They are, from left to right, a roundhouse, machine shop, and powerhouse. The Union Pacific Railroad turned these structures over to the city of Evanston in 1972. And in 1998, the city began to renovate them for use in public events and as city office space. And I'm renovating the 3 structures on my layout as well by kit bashing them from commercial kits. I wanted the structures to appear as they do today and not as they appeared during the steam era. Well, that's what I have been able to accomplish in 8 short years. But why does so much work still remain to be done? Well, for a number of reasons, I suppose. For example, I'm always getting new ideas for the layout. I discover changes that I'd like to make, such as modifying the track plan. And there are always more details to add. My attitude has been, what's the hurry? It's a hobby, not a job. But I guess the biggest reason why it's taking me so long to complete my layout is this. I'm the world's slowest model railroader. Huh. Now remember, you can support this channel if you like via PayPal. I will put my PayPal link down below. And be sure to subscribe if you haven't done it yet. If you'd like to see more detail about the construction of my layout, you can at this playlist called Building My Layout over here. Just click on it. Well, thanks for letting me share the world's most amazing hobby with you. I'm Roy Smith. Until next time, happy railroading.